Larry tried to kill me.
Yeah. I was so thoroughly disgusted.
I mean, think about it. Why does it make you special to do what you do?
Packers jumping around. They rush 4. Plenty of time for John. Now squeezes, steps up in the pocket. Elway can run inside the 10. Head first. He dives off the 5-yard line. My goodness.
Rushing 4, ball comes out of the hands of Newton. It's on the ground, and it's still on the ground. Picked up by T.J. Ward at the 4-yard line.
There's also Brian Clady and Bob Miller. Third and long 3. Going deep. Oh, and he's got Thomas. Goodbye. Touchdown.
Here we go. First snap of the overtime. The Broncos have been in 3 overtime games this year. They won them all. Got him at the 40. It's Thomas at the 50. Stiff arm got him. Green to the 30. To the 20. Thomas to the 10. Denver's going on the New England. They win it on the first play of overtime.
And welcome to the show. My name is Mundungus Creevy, and I am joined, as always, by my co-hosts Glenn and Cam. And you are currently tuned in to the 5280 podcast on the MHRT Network. We are a fan-led Broncos-based podcast filling you in on all things Denver Broncos. Now, today, we have another amazing guest. He is a site expert for predominantly orange and NFL Spin Zone, as well as the co-host of Locked On Broncos with Cody Rourke. He is an absolute fixture in Broncos country, as well as a traitor to all Cornhusker fans and everyone that lives in Nebraska. Ladies and gentlemen, Sayre Bedinger.
Yes.
Yes.
That intro would not have been complete without the last little bit there. I love it.
Right? I had to.
I love it. Yes.
And I was going to say, not only the fact that I'm a part of that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also a dig on me. So
it's a direct shot at Cam's heart right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Living in
Iowa
Nebraska
transplant.
and supporting Iowa. That is terrible.
You know,
that is blasphemy.
You know the most impressive thing that's even associated with that? Like Sayers told me multiple different times, like I will try and like stump a Nebraska player and be like, hey, you should go watch this player. And then he will literally say to me, dude, I literally don't watch any Nebraska football or even watch anything associated with a team that sucks. So,
yeah, come on. The best thing that Nebraska does is provide my family and I with an opportunity just to watch the Iowa Hawkeyes win every day after Thanksgiving. That's the gift that keeps on giving, really. That's Nebraska every year. They continually. So I should thank them, really.
Right? All right, so enough about Nebraska's terrible football team because they suck. Now, we are going to move on. We want to welcome Sayre to the show. Love everything you're doing with Predominantly Orange and Locked On Broncos. It's fantastic to have you on the show. And I kind of want to dig into training camp. And obviously, we just had some big news where Crockett and Tim Patrick have torn their ACLs today in training camp. What does that do for the wide receiving core with Tim Patrick now gone for the year?
Well, I think it's massive, honestly. I mean, Tim Patrick has probably been the Broncos' most consistent receiver over the last couple of years and definitely, I mean, become a fan favorite, right? So certainly not a good thing. One of the team's best run blockers, obviously a guy that the teammates and the coaches, they absolutely love him. So it changes a lot too, because I mean, KJ Hamler coming off the PUP list, it definitely, you know, I mean, they're not going to be having him out there doing a bunch of stuff in the preseason. So we don't necessarily know like what's his status going to look like as of week 1. We hope he's going to be ready to go. But now you got Tim Patrick out for the season. KJ Hamler coming back from a serious injury. Tyree Cleveland's not practicing right now. To me, and I've been saying this since March, April, I think the Broncos need to go out and get some more receiver help. I know they got a lot of young guys they like, but I'd go out and grab somebody if I was them.
Who would you grab?
I like Will Fuller. I know that a lot of people have been tweeting at me saying the same exact thing all the time. It's like, well, Will Fuller's also injury prone. And it's like, well, you know what? You got to get 17 games somewhere. So if you have to get it from one guy and the other and combine it together, you might as well get the guy that has the highest upside. I mean, we're talking about one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL in Russell Wilson and one of the best, most proven deep threats in the league in Will Fuller when he's healthy. So to me, I'd be willing to take that shot depending on the price. Like, I'm not saying, oh, go out and give him a 3-year deal worth $40 million or something like that. I'm saying go out and give him a 1-year prove it deal, see what he can do, see if he can actually give you something. But I think Will Fuller to me is the guy that makes the most sense. But I understand also that may not be in the cards because that's not really, George Payton's not very reactionary in these kind of situations.
Yeah, and and especially with Tim Patrick, the injury itself, you're just absolutely gutted. For Patrick, because he's like the story of like the true underdog story, right? The guy that came from nothing and basically and really proved. I'm thankful, by the way, it's not Yeezys. I'm thankful it's not Yeezys.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't see them? Oh, those are the new Yeezy. No,
those are the Yeezy socks. That's what those
Yeezys.
But Tim Patrick, he's such a phenomenal story of how you truly kind of came from what seemed like a nothing in the sense, like it's to a rise of fame and almost stardom to what Sayre said, like the most consistent wide receiver the Broncos have had. And so it does, torch you as even Bronco fans or even teammates. Like we heard today that the team offense and defense were just huddling around Patrick. And one of the things that I thought was so touching, at least for, and maybe it's just the sentimental stuff for me, but like to see KJ Hamler walk to the locker room with Tim Patrick, I think tells you, one, how far KJ has come along with his mental aspect of the injury that he was dealing with and the stuff that he can incorporate and tell Tim Patrick. But also just the true nature of just how close knit, not just the wide receiver room is, but the entire team. It's a brotherhood.
Yeah, well, it is. And you love it. You love to see that.
Well, and the one name that I keep seeing pop up is Emmanuel Sanders, like all the time. Like, bring back Emmanuel Sanders, which I wouldn't have a problem with. But honestly, I keep hearing a lot of good things about Montrell Washington. Do we think that Montrell Washington steps up?
I mean, that's what it sounds like, right? It sounds like Montrell Washington, like at the beginning of camp, there were all these rumors that I read anyways, that it was like, well, Montrell Washington's not going to be contributing a ton to the offense. And that's basically what he's done all throughout training camp, is contribute a ton to the offense. Mm-hmm. So I say give him a shot, right? If you're not going to go out and sign somebody or trade for somebody, you might as well throw him out there with Russell Wilson, because he was out there at the San Diego complex working out with Russell Wilson already. And we know Brandon Johnson's another rookie that had done that as well. So those might be two guys that, as Russell Wilson is kind of, learning a little bit, we heard about the little Peyton Manning connection there. And obviously Peyton's around the facility. Like, Peyton used to do stuff like that as well. I mean, if a guy was getting invited to the Duke workouts, I remember that everybody was like, okay, we better pay attention to this guy, because obviously Peyton really likes him. Or he's plucking Brandon Marshall off the practice squad and being like, hey, this linebacker is really good, he should be playing. Yeah. I mean, you could see Russell Wilson kind of having a similar thing, because remember when he was in Seattle, one of his issues was that he wasn't getting enough input on the way that, the team was built, or the guys that were calling the offense. So the Broncos and George Payton, like, they've shown they're going to give him input. Like, Russ was out there clamoring for certain free agents and different things like that. I think that the Broncos are going to let him be in on these decisions for sure.
Well, and one of them might end up being, you mentioned Brandon Marshall, might actually even bringing tight end Brandon Marshall. That's a joke, by the way. But it was one that That's one that Sayre brought up, of course. You know, to bring Brandon Marshall back and make him into a tight end, but
throw him out there.
So Sayre, it would be interesting to see, like, with Patrick once he has a surgery and with the recovery. You know, he's so close to KJ and to Cortland, and both of those guys had their knee injuries. It'll be interesting to see how they support him behind the scenes to really help avoid some of the dark spots that both of those guys went through in their recoveries, more so KJ than Court.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be huge too, especially because like Tim Patrick, I mean, his story from when he was at Utah is insane. Like there was a time I think that if you look back and read through some of the interviews that he did and things that were reported about his leg injury at Utah, like they didn't know if he was ever going to play football again. And so he's been through like those times as well. So I can't help but wonder, like, now that he's made it to this point of getting that big second contract and finally having a quarterback in place, like I think initially that dejection from your season ending before it even begins, you finally got paid and you get a chance to go out there and prove, you know, why you deserve that second contract, and you get Russell Wilson in the building and everything's finally going to be turning around, and now you don't get to play. I mean, those guys will definitely be there for him because they've seen and they've experienced exactly what he's going through now. So it doesn't matter how long ago he went through it at Utah. He's going to be used to the rehab process, but it's not necessarily about the rehab process anymore. It's more about the fact of like, man, I finally reached this pinnacle of my professional career, and here I got to start from scratch again.
Yeah. You know, you had mentioned about, you know, some of the players in-house like Brandon Johnson, you know, and some of those other guys. The Broncos main and Will Fuller as far as a possibility outside, like to bring in. But do you have a personal favorite within the matter? I mean, like as far as like a wide receiver that you want to see maybe internally, because I know that there's a lot of players within that wide receiver room that, I mean, let's be honest, it is kind of a deep wide receiver room in that sense. I mean, you have Travis Fulgham, who was a really productive wide receiver with the Philadelphia Eagles for like half a season before, you know, his career kind of got derailed with the Philadelphia Eagles. You have, you have Kendall Hinton, who's the Hall of Fame quarterback, and, you know, Hall of Famer Kendall Hinton. And then you have obviously KJ Hamler, but then you also have, of course, Seth Williams. Do you see, for example, some of these guys really just exerting themselves and possibly making it 6 wide receivers, maybe 7 wide receivers of who they keep?
Well, I think for me, like back when during the 2021 NFL draft, I was kind of pining for the Broncos to take Seth Williams. And I really thought at the time, because Tim Patrick was on the last year of his deal, nobody knew whether he was going to be traded in the offseason or whether he was going to get a second contract or whether they'd let him go after the season in free agency. So to me, I felt like Seth Williams in day 3 could have been an ideal potential future replacement for Tim Patrick, just in terms of like body type, catch radius, all those different things that we saw from him at Auburn, especially with, you know, the quarterback situation being what it was. But now I think the opportunity is there for all those guys that you mentioned. I mean, if the Broncos are willing to go youth movement at the wide receiver position behind Cortland Sutton, Jerry Judy, and KJ Hamler, they should be keeping all these options on the table, regardless of draft status, regardless of signing bonus status. I mean, all these different things. To me, if I'm rooting for a guy, it's going to be Seth Williams, just because I feel like in terms of size, speed, catch radius, the ability to make big plays down the field, the ability to be a threat in the red zone, the ability to do all these different things, I feel like Seth Williams is the guy that can most capably go in and actively like replace, you know, quote unquote replace, because it's Tim Patrick versus an unproven guy. But I feel like he's the guy that could potentially go in there and actually do that and give you some similar things that Tim Patrick brought to the table.
Right. And one of the things that I kind of want to shift to, you know, again, with Tim Patrick being injured and potentially lost for the season, how big of a difference is it going to make having Russell Wilson's leadership on the team as opposed to the leadership we've had through other quarterbacks throughout the years? Not saying they had bad leadership, Drew Lock, but how how is the team going to be able to handle the injury like to Tim Patrick with Wilson being a leader on the team?
I think it's going to be worlds apart, worlds different, just because Russell Wilson, unlike every other quarterback the Broncos have had since Peyton Manning, Russell Wilson is the guy that I say this all the time and people probably get sick of hearing it, but he's the tide that raises all boats. I mean, he's the guy that makes everybody better. Your other quarterbacks just don't do that. You're relying on the skill players to make those other quarterbacks better, in my opinion. And we saw just a complete cluster of different things come to a head last year, with Teddy Bridgewater being this quote unquote safer option and Drew Lock kind of being the loose cannon. And then you got Pat Shurmur calling plays and really not, utilizing, to put it as lightly as I possibly can, not utilizing his guys well at all. So I definitely think that Russell Wilson changes the game completely. Even if he's out there calling an audible on every play and taking control of the offense, I feel like he's the guy that makes everybody better as a quarterback, that understands how to read defenses, that understands timing, that understands how to build chemistry with receivers and really get on the same page with guys. That's why you can, maybe if you're George Payton, you could go out there and say, well, we can, just kind of rely on Kendall Hinton and Seth Williams and Travis Fulgham, because we know that Russell Wilson is going to make those guys better. It's not that they're going to drag Russell Wilson back, because he's done all throughout his time in Seattle, from, high draft picks like Percy Harvin and Tyler Lockett to guys that were nobody coming out of college like Doug Baldwin. So I think that Russell Wilson has proven he can elevate the game of whatever receivers he's playing with. It's now just going to be a matter of, can these receivers step up? Can they make the plays when they're given the opportunities?
Yeah. So Graham referenced the tweets from Russell. I can read them for you real quick. To Tim Patrick, going to miss balling with you, TP Streets. You've overcome every challenge in your life, and you will overcome this one. Faith is stronger than the circumstances. And to Crockett, praying for you, Croc. Your hard work is always amazing. You will be back.
And that I think is a testament to the type of leader that Russell Wilson is. And I think that for we mentioned Peyton Manning. I think that was one of the amazing things about Peyton Manning when he was here, is that you saw names that, let's be completely honest, was almost like forgotten to Bronco fans. Two in particular, Cody Latimer and Andre Caldwell, like two guys that you never really thought of, and then all of a sudden Cody Latimer has his really good year with the Denver Broncos, and then really kind of forces himself as far as being a really good special teams player. And Andre Caldwell goes on and has a pretty decent, season, or near the end of the season, that helps him get to a Super Bowl. And I think that those are the kinds of things that does separate those types of quarterbacks from, the middle of the road quarterbacks to those true Hall of Fame type quarterbacks. When you have those wide receivers who are making names for themselves. I mean, heck, look at even Russell Wilson when he was with the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, he was having wide receiver rooms of people that maybe people felt like were an afterthought, like guys like Jermaine Kearse or even Doug Baldwin, maybe before he came into his own and establishing the relationship that he had with Russell Wilson. Even David Moore, Broncos legend David Moore. I mean, he was making him, into what seemed like maybe a fantasy darling for like a few weeks. And so I think that's the make or break it stuff with those kinds of quarterbacks, is that they can truly elevate the play and level of a lot of those players within that wide receiver room.
Yeah. And Graham's got a question. He says, do you bring Tim Patrick back late in the year? You misspelled when. It's not if, it's when. He's cleared and Broncos are in the playoff race.
Yes, I love that question. I think absolutely, if he's cleared, no doubt you bring him back. I mean, we've seen crazier things. Cam Akers last year, I mean, didn't he rupture his Achilles in training camp and then come back and play in the playoffs? So, I mean, crazier things have happened. And Tim Patrick, we know he's going to work hard to get back on the field quickly. And I mean, you certainly don't want to risk his long-term health being out there. It's a knee injury, and his knee is obviously critical to his position. But if he's cleared medically, I say, yeah, bring him back.
Yeah. So now, obviously, go ahead.
I was going to say, today was the first day of practicing in pads, and we have two essentially season-ending injuries, even though we're still pushing for Tim to make it back this year. Do you think that changes the strategy of how the team practices moving forward, or do they just look at it as a possibility in these types of these situations arise in camps?
Yeah, I think you definitely consider it, and the NFL certainly does. They've put so much stuff into the CBA that it almost makes it like, how many padded practices can you count them on one hand anymore, But I think for sure when you see things like this, like, not that it was non-contact, I think Crockett, according to Cody, who I talked with earlier, it sounds like Crockett's injury happened just like on a routine, like, special teams drill. So not even necessarily contact there. Kind of surprised everyone, walking off the field with the trainer. And then Tim Patrick obviously just coming down weird. It's one of those things where, like, it's in football, it's so unpredictable, right? You could come down weird, or you could have a guy get hit, right on the side of the leg, right on the knee, and get up and be completely fine. So, I mean, I don't know if they'll change anything necessarily. I think you definitely protect your players as best as you possibly can, but the NFL has definitely done a lot of that work for the Broncos. They don't necessarily have to, like, adjust too much. I don't think. We'll see probably tomorrow, run through type of thing. And I don't know. We'll see what they change, but you definitely don't want to go into the season having any more of this happen. So if the intensity gets too much, they might change some things up.
Well, I was just gonna say that's also one of the reasons why a lot of people say in the business of even training camp or stuff like, whether it's padded practice or even in games, non-contact injuries are the absolute worst.
Yeah. So before we move on to any other training camp stuff, Graham threw out a tweet from Albright. Says, if they do eventually sign a free agent wide receiver, I'd expect it to be someone familiar with his staff. That'd be a down roster guy like a Dante Moncrief rather than a consensus top dollar available guy, end quote, as people would say. What are we thinking about that?
I didn't even know Dante Moncrief was still playing, to be honest with you. That's interesting, and if it is more about familiarity, it kind of makes you wonder, do they start calling up the Green Bay Packers and seeing what's up there? I mean, I know that there's not a ton like that's appealing on the Packers roster right now, but I think they do have more guys on their roster than they're going to eventually keep. So maybe you get an opportunity to go play a little bit more with Nathaniel Hackett and Justin Outen in Denver if the Packers have 7 or 8 guys they like, and you could swing a deal there. But yeah, like, that probably won't happen until later on in camp. And, we'll see. I mean, these young guys, they've got a big opportunity ahead, because it doesn't sound like George Paton's going to go flocking to the free agent market to try to find somebody, or to the trade market to try to find somebody. There's a lot of ideas that are being thrown around there that seem fine on paper. They seem good on paper, but unless the Broncos are willing to pay up, I mean, if your plan A is in-house guys, definitely I'd say just forget the free agent pickup down the line. Just go with the guys that you have. If you feel really like you have 10 to 12 wide receivers that are capable of playing for you in the regular season, maybe scour the waiver wire at roster cuts and just kind of call it at that.
Before today, like, how many wide receivers did you expect the Broncos to keep on the 53, and who were they?
So my expectation has been 6 and possibly 7, depending on if Montreal Washington or somebody else was strictly a specialist. So kind of lumping them in with kicker, punter, long snapper. If somebody like that was a specialist, a returner, I would say 7, but I think 6 is typically where your sweet spot is. And obviously that included Tim Patrick at the time. So, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Judy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler. I think Kendall Hinton is relatively a lock for this roster, depending on what we see in preseason play. Tyree Cleveland, it sounds like the Broncos coaching staff likes him a lot. So, I mean, it could be 6 or 7, even with the Tim Patrick injury, but I think obviously Montreal Washington will round out that group now. So if you look at it right now without Tim Patrick, you're looking at Sutton, Judy, Hamler, Hinton, and then guys like Montreal Washington and Tyree Cleveland, unless somebody else comes in and blows them out of the water.
Right. Do you think Seth Williams has a real good opportunity here, or what's your thought on him?
He does. I mean, he has the best opportunity, in my opinion. Like I was saying before, I think like he replaces almost effectively he's the only guy on the roster that can give you similar physical traits to Tim Patrick, in my opinion. So to me, he's that guy that I think could go out there and play that true like X receiver position and be that guy, and maybe even bring you a little something different to the table, maybe a little better long speed than Tim Patrick has, maybe not as sure of hands. He might not go an entire season with 0 drops, if he's featured in the offense, but certainly a guy that gives you big playability. And we saw in the preseason last year, like his crazy run after the catch, that wasn't something we got to see enough of from him at Auburn. So I think for sure Seth Williams is a guy that has a huge opportunity ahead. And if he can have a big couple of practices before this Dallas Cowboys, game, I feel like he's definitely in good shape.
Yeah, I thought when he was cut last year, I thought that another team would scoop him up in a heartbeat. We were lucky to have guys.
Yeah. I gotta ask, obviously, because if it wasn't a big season now for Jerry Judy, it's an even bigger season now for Jerry Judy and everything that is going to be coming to the forefront for him. We all know that he certainly seems to be starring in camp, at least early on, but this is just one of those situations, unfortunately, with injury, that could really put him even more at the forefront of this offense, and potentially even being maybe the guy that leads the team in targets and then leads the team in yards. Does this possibly even bump him up even more to being potentially the guy that's not only going to be leading them, let's just say Triple Crown, right? Leading them in targets or receptions and then yardage and then touchdowns. Does this put him in that category as far as being the guy that's going to lead them in touchdowns? We know Cortland's still there, though.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see at least one touchdown from Jerry Judy this year. That unlike last year, where we didn't get any. So I think for sure with Tim Patrick going down, like Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton, the pressure is first and foremost on them. Like we can talk about back end of the roster all we want, but really, I mean, it just ultimately means more for Sutton and Judy. They're going to be heavily involved, and obviously KJ Hamler as well, assuming he's able to be back at full strength. I mean, I think his recovery has been remarkable and bordering miraculous. But at the same time, this is a guy that had knee surgery, hip surgery. He lost 40 pounds. He had to have one piece of his one knee, and move to the other knee. So it's a serious injury that he's coming back from. And as shocking as his recovery may be, I think that definitely your top 2 guys are the guys that you are looking at and saying right now, like, hey, you guys are the guys. Like, you need to go out there and catch everything. You need to get open on it. I mean, those are the guys, because the Broncos are also in a transition period at tight end. Like, there's no more Noah Fant. He led the team in catches last year. So Greg Dulcich hasn't been healthy to start camp, and Alberto hasn't been making a ton of headlines, although from what I understand, he's looking pretty good still. And so it's just a fascinating thing. Like, we're going to see the effect of Russell Wilson on the roster very, very quickly, and how much his impact is going to be made, like we were talking about before.
Right. So obviously this offseason, the entire focus was on the offense. I mean, you brought in Russell Wilson, you bring in Nathaniel Hackett and all of his staff. But from everything I'm hearing, the defense is showing out at training camp. So obviously it's not looking, as of now at least, that there really isn't that big of a drop-off with Vic Fangio not being here.
Which is cool. It's so cool to hear, right? Because Ejiro Evero, this is his first defensive coordinator gig in the NFL. So, I mean, it's absolutely awesome how these players have responded. I think it speaks a ton to the player leadership that the Denver Broncos have, starting with Justin Simmons and really being the defensive version of what Russell Wilson is for the offense, and getting these, getting the guys in the right spot and leading by example, and just really being so on point. And with Pat Surtain out there taking the next step, like, we thought he was good as a rookie, and he's going to be continually getting better and better, which we're seeing it like every day unfolding with one highlight after another. Or if you're out at practice, like, from everybody that's been out at practice, that what they're tweeting is like, they can't even quite comprehend the ascent that this guy's had. Right. I think even Mike Kliss said he might be the best player on the team. I mean, he's putting forth that kind of training camp. So to me, Ejiro Evero, he's got the pieces out there, no doubt. And I think one area that everybody's been concerned about off the edge, with Randy Gregory coming back from the shoulder and Bradley Chubb coming off injury, to me, I am highly optimistic. I know that may go against the grain, but I'm highly optimistic about the edge rushers, because I feel like the Broncos have ultimately I mean, just a vast array of players to put out there, and they can come like they've talked about all offseason. They can come in waves. So you improve that edge rush, and you have smart players in the secondary that can play fast. I feel like those are the ingredients to have a top 5 defense. And you're right, they haven't fallen off.
And then when you hear that Evero changed his own terminology to the previous Fangio terminology, so to make it easier on the players, I mean, that is true leadership. That is not something that you would have gotten on last year's staff at all.
You know, and to that point, I think that also shows you how young, Ejiro Evero is, but more importantly, how cerebral he is of a defensive mind, that even for as young as he is, that he's going to be able to put his team in the right position to basically win every single rep. And that was actually even one of the other critiques we had about Evero is how exactly is that scheme going to be? Like, is it going to be flawless? Is it going to be one that we're looking at it from the standpoint of, will there be bumps in the road? We know that there's probably going to be bumps in the road, down the line, because not everything's perfect. But I got to say, going back to the pass rush discussion, I think it's going to be so fascinating to me, because one of the things that, we talked about it here so often, and then obviously the other podcast, mainly Broncos, I mean, we talked about it so often about, which is, this whole situation that is happening with Malik Reed, because you're hearing some rumblings that guys like Baron Browning is actually showing out in camp, even as an edge rusher. And then you're also, hearing rumblings that Nick Bonito has had a pretty good start to training camp. And so I think that you're looking at this situation now where Malik Reed, it might actually come down to Malik Reed and Chris Allen as far as the decision there.
Yeesh.
Yeah, which would be, I mean, these are great problems to have, unlike previous years here where it's been like, well, we clearly got 4 guys and maybe a 5th will step up. But now it's like, well, we got 7 or 8 guys, and you got to figure out a way to get it down to 5, 6, maybe 7. I don't know what they're going to do there. I've tweeted about this before as well, but I feel like that off-ball linebacker position is going to be disvalued a little bit in Denver this year, based on what we've heard from the coaches or people that are close to the team, talking about more nickel, more dime, and then obviously bringing these edge rushers and having versatility at that group. Like Baron Browning could kick back and play off-ball linebacker if they need. Jonathan Cooper could do the same thing. And so you just have a ton of guys that have versatility like that. It wouldn't surprise me to see them keep maybe just 3 or 4 off-ball linebackers on the active roster and keep way more edge players than we're used to seeing.
Are you worried about Randy Gregory being ready for the season?
Honestly, no, which I'm not Randy, personally. I don't know what his shoulder feels like, and I'm not like the team doctor or anything, so I have no idea. But I mean, I feel like for sure with Mike Kliss saying that his shoulder is fully healed, that gives me confidence that he's just got to work his strength back, right? He's got to get back into the weight room. He's got to do those things and get that strength, because to me, like, I would think it would be foolish to say, well, he's fully healed from his surgery, and to just throw him out there when one of his best pass rush moves is sticking his hand in somebody's chest and using that shoulder. So to me, that's where I think you'd be getting a little foolish as a coaching staff or as a medical staff to say, we're going to throw him out there and in live reps and let him potentially risk, re-injuring that shoulder. That to me, I feel like definitely getting him ready for week 1 and say, okay, use the first couple of games of the regular season as your quote unquote preseason. It's a 17-game season. It's a long, long year. So having Randy Gregory at full speed by the time week 4 or 5 comes around, to me is way more important than saying we need to see him out there at training camp and see with our own eyes that he is going to be better than Von Miller. Because I'm still mad that we didn't sign Von Miller. I'm still mad that we didn't sign Chandler Jones. Like that, I think, is the motivation for people right now. And I'm putting words in people's mouths because I get tweeted like this all day, but I think that is the motivation for a lot of people to see Randy Gregory as soon as possible, is because they're frustrated that the team didn't sign Vaughn, that they didn't sign Chandler Jones, and that they didn't sign Hassan Reddick or make a trade for this, that, or the other, or draft this guy that they really liked. I feel like Randy Gregory has kind of felt the brunt of that because he had an offseason procedure that he and the team agreed was the best for both parties. So to me, I'm maybe irrationally optimistic about Randy Gregory. I don't know.
And Chandler's been out of practice for the Raiders, so it's not like he's he's showing off right now.
Right.
So before we grab these two or three questions that are in the chat, I feel like there's been focus from Broncos country on, especially on Pat Surtain. Him and Sutton have been going back and forth in training camp so far. And then you've got Jonas Griffith, who I have been hearing good things about it, inside linebacker. And then you've got, I think, a concern at, you were kind of talking about edge or outside linebacker with Nick Benito, also Baron Browning, and how are we going to be able to have or end up having a Browning Benito tandem because we don't have Gregory and Chubb, say they get injured or whatever. I mean, it sounds like all of the issues that we were talking about before training camp is all turning out to be on the positive side of things. We're not really hearing anything negative about any of the problems we thought the Broncos would have.
Which is a great sign of a good roster builder in charge of putting things together, right? I mean, those weaknesses, those perceived weaknesses becoming strengths. You also haven't heard anything about really the offensive line, despite the fact that two of your bigger free agent acquisitions aren't practicing, Billy Turner and Tom Compton, and so to me, it's just an indicator that George Paton knows what he's doing. I've questioned a lot of his moves in the past, but I've kind of learned, like with Jonas Griffith, I was frustrated by that trade because I'm thinking to myself, you're going to cover up Tom McMahon's ineptitude out there as a special teams coach by trading actual draft picks for a guy that can actually play special teams instead of, relying on the coach or making a change at that coaching position. So I was frustrated by that move. Then all of a sudden we see him out there the last 4 games of the season, and it's like this guy's a heat-seeking missile who's in the frame of every single defensive play. Yeah. So I feel like, man, I'm just kind of learning to kind of go with the flow with George Paton, and certainly at those positions, like you mentioned, Jonas Griffith sounds like he's been one of the top stars of camp. And to me, he upgrades that team speed defensively to such a point, to such a degree that's where that, like you said before, that drop off that we, maybe anticipated or some maybe anticipated, there's a reason why that's not happening. It's because everybody out there plays so fast, not to mention Josie Jewell, who, I mean, it was a small sample last year, but I've watched him every game he played at Iowa and in the pros. That was as fast as I've seen Josie Jewell play in regular season action as well. So I think that's where the Broncos are really stepping it up is like you said, that building that roster, building that team speed, which is something that George Paton has emphasized from day one.
Yeah. Sarah, you mentioned the offensive line. What do you predict the starting lineup is going to be? And do you see any of these linemen being traded before the season starts?
That's such a great question because I don't know exactly, so I can't get in trouble from the Broncos for saying anything here because I don't know what the depth chart has been every day. But my guess would be Garrett Bowles, Dalton Reisner, Lloyd Cushenberry, Quinn Miners, and then Calvin Anderson at right tackle. We haven't heard much about, and I guess the reporting restrictions are out there, so I don't know how much Graham Glasgow is rotating in at the center position or at left guard. I don't know how much anybody else is rotating in with Dalton Reisner at left guard. We know Netane Muti kind of got an opportunity to rotate in at right guard, which was a little surprising. I think definitely that would be interesting is if the Broncos were like, okay, we've seen enough from Miners and Muti that those are our 2 starting guards. Then you could trade Dalton Reisner, which would suck. I mean, I listened to him on one of your guys' shows, and I thought he was fantastic. Every time you listen to Dalton Reisner speak, it's like, man, that guy is he's such an impressive dude. And he loves the Broncos. He's from Colorado. Like, you would hate to see him get traded, but I mean, if you're talking about this just in terms of team building, like he's in the last year of his contract. He hasn't quite played as well as maybe he or everyone else had hoped over the last 2 years. At least that's what people who evaluate offensive line have been saying. And so I think that's one area where you could say maybe a change of scenery makes sense, or maybe it is somebody like Muti who's got 2 years left. I don't know. So to me, I think that's the starting 5. And I think you kind of got to keep almost all your bodies at this point because you haven't seen Billy Turner practice. Tom Compton's got the back injury. So I don't know. Maybe you keep the bodies instead of trading somebody away unless, George Paton gets blown away with an offer.
Yeah, well, and even to that point, I think that we all know, and even maybe it's offensive line PTSD throughout the years, but it's just like our offensive line depth has been not the greatest. I mean, it's been better as years have been progressing, but I mean, it's not been the greatest. But I will have to say the emergence of Netane Moody is, I think, one that could throw a significant wrench in all of that, because here was a guy that, if we're going to compare Dalton Reisner to Moody, he was a guy that I think people were kind of comparing in the sense that, Reisner is a really solid fit for the system, and I still think he's a great fit for the system. But then you look at Moody, and there was a lot of questions as far as everything that was happening within the system and everything, about his, fit there. But it certainly seems, from what we're seeing from the early, takeaways from camp, that Moody has actually looked really good. And whether it's, beef with Zach Seegers and DJ Jones, whatever, but on that play, but on that specific play of DJ Jones, it was Netane Moody who was actually blocking Jones. And it looked fairly well that, Moody kind of handled his own a little bit. I mean, he was one that was upright, and Jones, wasn't, even if he did slip.
DJ Jones said he slipped.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with DJ Jones out there. I'd be like, oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. You did slip. You're right. I saw it wrong. So, yeah, that's a fascinating thing that you bring up, though, just because I feel like there was such a misconception out there because Muti didn't work out before the draft. Like, he threw up 40-some bench press reps and didn't do the other workouts because of injury. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, well, he's more of like a phone booth guy. He's like a plotter. I never saw that when I watched him play at Fresno State. All I saw was a super athletic freak out there playing. He played left tackle. He played left guard. He played right guard. He was playing all over the place. And then I pulled a bunch of clips from that 2020 season when he got in late. And he's out there pulling, and he's out there doing all these things, getting out in space and making blocks against linebackers and defensive backs. And I don't know. To me, I feel like you got to watch the guy play before you make a judgment about whether or not he'd be a good fit for the zone blocking scheme, just because that scheme does. Yeah, it requires you to be, pretty nimble and quick on your feet, but he's proven that he is.
Yeah. So we got D-Rock, who is formerly known as Shadow Jacker, who is the late night host of MHRT In the Dark. He asked,
not with a D-Rock name.
I don't know. Should the Broncos still trade for Deion Jones or focus on a wide receiver now?
Man, I hadn't even thought about a Deion Jones trade. That's kind of interesting. I personally wouldn't trade for a linebacker. I mean, I thought the Joe Schobert possibility was interesting. There's other free agent linebackers maybe out there that you consider, but I think you ride with Josie Jewell and Jonas Griffith. Like, those are your guys as the starters, and anything beyond that, like, if one of those guys gets hurt, then you maybe make a trade for a starting caliber player. But I think I'm on board. I'm on the train for Jonas Griffith. I even said on Locked On Broncos, and I was just saying it to kind of be contrarian to Cody, because we were predicting who's going to lead the team in tackles, and he already picked Josie Jewell. So I'm like, all right, I'll pick Jonas Griffith. But as with anything, as you guys know, as content creators as well, you kind of like, all right, I'm picking Jonas Griffith. So, like, why could Jonas Griffith be the leading tackler? And I convinced myself as I was talking about all these reasons. So I feel like, man, those are the two guys those are my ride or die at linebacker this year.
Yeah. So is Cody having the time of his life at camp, and now that he's moved to Denver?
He is. He would tell you, he needs some sunscreen out there, but yeah, he is. I mean, and he's killing it too. It's cool to see. I mean, he's living the dream, right? He's out there every single day. He's going to be at every practice, and he's really enjoying it. So getting to talk to the players and getting to be around practice and chum with the other media. So he's loving it.
Awesome. D-Rock comes back again. D-Rock. Sarah, what's the word on K-Jack progression this training camp? Has there been progression?
Yeah, I think mum's the word with Kareem Jackson, and I think that's the best possible news. I think if you were hearing anything bad about Kareem Jackson, that would be where I would be like, ooh, that's, I mean, Caden, if people were out there saying that Caden Stearns looks so much better or PJ Locke looks so much better, but they're not. I mean, Kareem Jackson is out there. I feel like I read something today even where they were talking about how Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons are just so in lockstep out there right now, even in a new defense, that you're not going to screw around with that. So I've thought about the idea of Kareem Jackson slipping into the dime linebacker role because he's so ferocious, get him out there as a blitzer every now and again. But I think mum's the word on Kareem Jackson. And if anything, that's to me the best thing.
Now, the last thing I want to cover before we go, because I don't want to hold you too long. I know you got stuff to do. The big difference between the last couple seasons and this season so far in training camp, no 7-on-7 drills. Why?
That's a great question, because that was one of my favorite drills when I was playing in high school. Is, I don't have to really hit anybody. I don't know. I don't know why that is. I think that definitely they're trying to get as many live reps as they possibly can out there, instead of, like, Nathaniel Hackett had a good explanation for it the other day. I'd be butchering it if I tried to say exactly what he said verbatim, but essentially, they want to limit those 7-on-7 one-on-ones because it's not real football, is essentially what they said. And I think the coaching staff was in kind of a agreement about that. And so they maybe just kind of came unified together and said, we've made this decision. We don't agree that it's the best way to evaluate. And I can't say that I blame them for that. If they can get the same reps, because somebody asked a great question. I think it was Brandon Cristal the other day who asked a really great question about, like, how does that affect your bottom of the roster guys? Because a lot of times you see these young players emerging in 1-on-1s or 7-on-7 because they're getting, easier, if I can say that, easier opportunities to kind of stand out. And they basically just said, that's why we're working in the extra 11-on-11 periods at the end of practice to get those young guys opportunities. So to me, if they're doing that, if they're being intentional and getting everybody opportunities, that to me is a win-win for everybody.
And one thing that the players are all saying in their interviews is that they're loving the competition. Like, the offense versus defense thing is the real deal this year.
Yeah. Ones-on-ones. I mean, that's best on best, and you love to see that. And that goes for every unit too. So I think that's really cool.
And I was going to say, even too, for a coaching staff that wants to possibly get the best possible evaluation out of every single player, maybe I should say the fastest evaluation out of every single player that is on that team, doing 7-on-7s is not the best way to go about it. It is those team drills that you're going to be doing, those full squad drills that you're going to be doing. And so if you can be able to do that now, it does put it at risk as far as like higher risk of injury. But at the same point, like, that is also the best way that you can still evaluate your player and evaluate who is not going to be on the roster or who's going to be on your 53-man roster.
Right.
Now, we again want to thank Sayre so much for joining us on the show today. That's going to about do it for us. Now, people can follow you on Twitter at Sayre Bedinger or at Predominantly Orange. Is there anywhere else you want people to come and check you out somewhere? Maybe your Yeezy pictures or something.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't started that yet, but yeah, if people can spell my name right, I mean, they can find me on Twitter. That's kind of the key. It's kind of like the Black Pearl in Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, if you know where to find me, you can find me.
So again, thank you so much, and make sure you like, subscribe, share, follow, turn on notifications so that you know when we post and when we go live. Also, make sure you check out our other podcast, The Wild Wild West, which is an AFC West podcast on Wednesdays at 7:30, 6:30, 5:30, 4:30. And Broncos Breakdown with Get Off My Yard, Bronco Bill on Fridays at 2, 1, 12, and 11. Want to thank everybody so much for joining us. Again, especially Sayre. And we will see you guys later. Bye-bye.